the Mayan countdown. They told me it was prophecy, that the Mayan calendars marked the end of the world. They were wrong. It was not an end. It was a countdown, a clock, something far older than humanity itself. And I learned too late what it was counting down to. I am Dr. Elias Cortez, archaeologist, historian, researcher of forgotten things. Or perhaps I am a man who has lost his mind chasing whispers in stone. My study smells of dust and burnt coffee. Books lie in stacks on the floor, spines cracked, some pages yellowed with age. Photographs of ancient ruins, fragments of tablets, maps of temple sites, all clutter the room. The only light comes from a swinging desk lamp, its bulb casting long, shifting shadows across walls lined with notes and diagrams scrawled in haste. On my desk lies the fragment, my grandfather's gift, a piece of stone so ancient it seems to breathe beneath my fingers. It is etched with glyphs no one has ever translated completely. They twist across the surface in strange patterns, not just writing, but something else entirely, something that feels like a language of movement and light. I've spent decades staring at it, trying to decipher its meaning. I once believed it was prophecy. Now I know it was something else. A timer. I lean back in my chair, the leather creaking beneath me. Outside my window, the city hums in its usual restless way, but somewhere deep in my mind, something whispers, it is counting down. I first learned of the fragment 20 years ago, when I was still young and desperate for discovery. My grandfather returned from Guatemala changed, weathered, silent. His expedition had been a success in ways he refused to speak of. One evening, he summoned me into his study. The fire was low. The air was thick with cigar smoke. On his lap rested the fragment, wrapped in a cloth of deep green. "This," he said quietly, his voice trembling, "is not prophecy. It is a clock, a machine, and it is still running." I remember leaning forward, my breath catching. "Running? You mean—" "Yes," he said, cutting me off. "It counts. It counts for something beyond us, something we cannot understand. Remember the time, Elias." That was all he said before turning away. Weeks later, he was gone. The fragment became mine, and so did the obsession. For years I buried myself in research. I became an archaeologist obsessed not with discovery, but with decoding something humanity had forgotten. The glyphs were strange, not like any known Mayan writing. Patterns shifted beneath my eyes. It was as if the stone itself was alive. The deeper I delved, the more I realized the truth. The Mayan calendars were not telling time. They were marking something, something larger, something outside the earth. They were a timer, a system countdown. And when the date approached, the world began to change. At first, it was subtle. Buildings shifted in ways no one noticed. Faces disappeared from photographs. People vanished without record. Roads would rearrange themselves overnight. I began documenting these changes quietly. My colleagues dismissed me as mad, but I knew better. That's why I brought in Amara Solis. She was brilliant, a linguist whose name was whispered in academic circles. Fluent in ancient tongues, she didn't believe in prophecy or conspiracy, but she believed in truth. She agreed to work with me after I showed her the fragment. Kiran Naidu joined soon after, a physicist who called himself a skeptic. He came to prove me wrong, to show that my years of chasing shadows were nothing more than madness. We met in my study one night. The fragment sat between us, glowing faintly under the desk lamp. Amara traced her fingers over the glyphs. "These are not just symbols," she said. "They are instructions, a schematic. This is not a calendar, it is a mechanism." Kiran laughed softly. "Mechanism for what? Rituals? Construction?" "You're chasing ghosts, Cortez." "I've been chasing ghosts for 20 years, I said softly, "and now they are answering." Amara didn't look up. "You've awakened something." We began translating the fragment piece by piece. Nights bled into mornings. The glyphs spoke of cycles, not seasons, not astronomy, but alignments. Alignments with something beyond the stars. Something else. And there was a date, written plainly, embedded in the patterns. We mapped it. And it was coming soon, too soon. It became clear it was not prophecy. It was a countdown. We called it the countdown. The changes began small. At first I ignored them. A misplaced street, a building gone the next day, a friend forgetting a memory I could still recall vividly. Then they grew. Amara came to me one evening, breathless. "Look at this," she said. She showed me her phone, a photograph she had taken in Guatemala. A house was gone. An hour later she returned, and the house had been replaced with something else. No records, no history. Kiran scoffed. Coincidence. Memory is fallible, but I knew what I was seeing. One night we worked late. Rain pounded against my study window. The fragment lay between us, pulsing faintly. Then the lights died. Not a blackout, something heavier. The air seemed to vanish. At the edge of my vision I saw movement, figures, tall, faceless, flickering like broken holograms. They didn't move, they simply existed, watching. I whispered to Amara, "Do you see them?" She shook her head. Kiran laughed nervously. "You've been working too long." But I knew. They were not human. They were guardians. The first sign that the countdown was real. From that moment, I could not rest. The fragment pulsed more strongly. Reality began to fracture around me. I began hearing whispers in dreams, seeing patterns in shadows, and then I knew the countdown had begun. When it reaches 0, nothing will be the same again. From the moment we unlocked the meaning of the fragment, nothing was as it had been. The world began to shift. At first the changes were small. A street sign altered overnight. A photograph no longer matched reality. Faces in the crowd would vanish when I looked away. But each change felt deliberate. A faint rearranging of existence itself. The first night it happened in earnest. I was alone in my study. Rain pattered against the glass, the lamp casting trembling shadows over the fragment. I was staring at it when the air seemed to change, a low hum, deep and rhythmic, vibrating somewhere behind my chest. The glyphs began to glow faintly, pulsing like some heartbeat buried in stone. A noise came then, not a sound in the usual sense, but something deeper, an undercurrent of vibration that seemed to crawl into my bones. My head swam. I looked up, and the room was subtly wrong. The stacks of books on my desk were rearranged, not toppled, not scattered, they had shifted. Titles I knew lay in unfamiliar places. A map on the wall showed routes I did not recognize. I blinked, and the shift corrected itself, as if nothing had happened. But I knew it had. I wrote it down later, page after page. My notes began to fill with sketches of the glyphs, diagrams of alignment patterns, and the words, "The countdown grows." When I showed Amara and Kiran, they were skeptical at first. But then the glitches began to happen to them too. Amara came to my study one morning, her eyes wide, her voice trembling. "Elias, I went to my apartment last night. I swear it was different. The furniture was shifted. A bookcase I have never owned was there. And my mirror, it didn't reflect me properly." Kiran wasn't convinced. "Psychological strain," he said. "We're working obsessively. You're seeing patterns because you're looking for them." But even as he spoke, his voice faltered. He had a photo on his phone, a street corner he had photographed only days before. It had changed. The buildings were different, the signs rearranged, something was rewriting reality. We began recording the changes. Late nights, we compared notes. We started to notice a pattern. Glitches accelerated as the date on the fragment approached. Small shifts gave way to larger ones. Entire locations changed overnight. Names of places and people altered in records, memories warped. And then came the whispers. They began softly, beneath the hum of my thoughts. At first I thought it was stress, a trick of exhaustion, but they were words, strange syllables I could not identify, whispered in a tone that felt ancient and alive. Sometimes I heard them in my sleep, sometimes when the fragment pulsed in my hand. Amara began to speak of them too. "It's like a language," she said quietly one night. "But it isn't human, it isn't Mayan, it's something older." Kiran tried to rationalize it. "Auditory hallucinations, you're all under strain." But I saw the fear in his eyes. The changes were no longer subtle. One morning, I walked through the city and found streets I had walked daily rearranged. Familiar landmarks shifted position. People looked at me strangely, as if I were out of sync with the world. And some, strangers I had known only fleetingly, would stare at me with expressions of confusion before turning away. The glitches became dangerous. Machines malfunctioned. Electronics warped. Clocks ran backward for seconds at a time. Even compasses began to spin wildly. And always the fragment pulsed. One night we stayed in my study long after midnight, translating more glyphs. The air grew heavier. Rain beat against the windows. And then the lights died. It wasn't darkness, it was absence. The air itself seemed to vanish. My breath was loud in the quiet. At the edge of my vision, shapes began to form. Figures, tall, faceless, flickering like broken holograms. They didn't move. They simply existed, watching. Amara gasped. "Elias." Kiran laughed nervously. "It's shadows. You're letting yourself slip." But I knew. They were not shadows. They were keepers. The guardians the codex fragment had warned of. For hours we sat in silence. The figures never moved. They never spoke. They just waited. By dawn they were gone. But the fragment pulsed stronger. The whispers were louder. And the date was closer. We began to understand. The countdown was no longer theoretical. It was active. We were inside it. The glitches grew more aggressive. Reality bent around us. Things shifted faster. People we knew began to disappear entirely, erased without record. Even memories of them vanished for those who once knew them. We realized that each glitch, each shift, was not random. It was part of something greater, something incomprehensible, something alive, and it was waking up. We called the keepers the first warning, but they were not the end. They were the beginning. The countdown was moving forward, and whatever it counted down to was coming. I could feel it. We all knew it was coming. It wasn't something we could stop. Not after what we had uncovered. The glyphs had shown us the date, and it was less than a week away. Every day, the world changed faster. The glitches grew more violent. Streets twisted in impossible angles. People began vanishing in mid-step. Entire blocks disappeared without record. We documented everything in trembling haste, but the more we tried to record, the more reality itself resisted. Memories of what we had seen slipped through our minds like sand between fingers. Even the fragment pulsed more strongly now, an unrelenting heartbeat beneath stone. We tried to leave the city, we tried to escape, but the city would not let us. Roads bent back on themselves, bridges led nowhere, the streets looped endlessly. It was as though we were trapped inside a living maze. Amara and Kiran argued constantly. Tension grew between us, fraying our nerves. "We can't fight this," Amara said one night, her voice broken. "It's rewriting existence itself. It doesn't matter what we do." Kiran gritted his teeth. "We have to try. If this is a countdown, we need to find what it's counting to. I said nothing. I was too exhausted to argue. The truth was, I already knew. The fragment had told us everything. We just hadn't wanted to admit it. The nights were the worst. That hum, the same low vibration I had first felt months ago, now filled every silence. It echoed in my skull, deeper than sound. It was not noise. It was a presence. And it was getting closer. The keepers came more often, always at the edge of sight, watching. They no longer hid. Their figures began to shimmer into partial clarity, pale, towering, faceless. Their presence brought a coldness that rotted warmth from the air. One night, I saw one step into my study. I could feel its weight in my chest before my eyes confirmed it. It bent the air around it, not walking but phasing through something I could not name. Its gaze was not directed at me. It was directed at the fragment. The glyph pulsed violently in response. Amara screamed when she saw it. Kieran grabbed her arm, pulling her away, but she shook him off. "We have to stop this," she said. "We have to break it." There was no breaking it. We had been chasing the wrong thing all along. The fragment was not a key, it was a signal, a call, and we had answered. The last night came quietly at first. Rain fell in slow sheets. The city was empty except for the hum and the shifting of streets. We gathered in my study, the fragment glowing faintly in the dark. Kieran laid his hand on it, staring. "This is it," he whispered. "It's here." Amara's voice trembled. "It's not just a date anymore, it's the event." The hum became a roar. The walls of the room seemed to stretch outward, twisting like a dream. Shadows moved of their own accord. Time slowed. I felt myself standing outside my body, watching it all happen as though through glass. The fragment pulsed with a brilliance that burned my eyes. A deep vibration filled the room. The keepers appeared then, dozens of them, their forms shimmering and unstable. They surrounded us in silence, not a sound except for the hum and our breathing. I thought of my grandfather, his final words, "Remember the time." I understood now. The countdown had not been for us. It had been for something else, something waking. The air ruptured with light. My mind broke. When I opened my eyes, it was over. Amara lay at my feet, her eyes wide, staring into something beyond sight. Kieran was still, collapsed against the wall. The fragment was gone. The city outside was no longer the city. The streets were gone. The sky had folded inward. Reality itself had been rewritten. I walked outside. There was no ground, no horizon, only the hum, endless and infinite. And the keepers. They moved toward me now, their faces shifting between forms I could not name. I tried to speak. No sound came. My body was cold, and my breath felt wrong. Then I saw them, not just around me, but everywhere. They were not guards, they were harvesters, collectors, and we were the offering. I fell to my knees. The hum consumed me. When the countdown reached 0, the world did not end. It was erased. Everything we had been, everything we had known, gone. There was nothing left but the hum and the keepers. They were still counting.